It's a new day, and a new console potato is holding back the generation. All right, guys, before we get into this, my goal is to hit 10K subscribers by the end of the year, and I see a lot of you are new here. If you like daily content, you like these styles of videos, please consider hitting that subscribe button. So it's been a rough couple of days for WB Games Montreal and Gotham Knights with the controversy of the game running at 30 frames per second without a toggle for a performance mode. People have been debating back and forth whether this is something that they will accept or not, and I think right now in this generation, the norm is to definitely have at the very least a toggle to give you the ability to get games playing at a higher frame rate than 30 frames per second, even if it greatly reduces the graphics fidelity. People want that choice, and going forward throughout the rest of this generation, I think this is going to be a point where developers see that and that they can't skip on not having that within the game. And we have another one that is just around the corner, and that is A Plague Tale Requiem, which is a day one Xbox Game Pass game, but it is also on other platforms, and we now know how this game is going to be running. And like Gotham Knights, it is going to be running in 30 frames per second. But that's not the entire story. There's also been an analysis done on this game, and as we talked about yesterday, that random guy who came out and said that the Xbox Series S was the potato holding back this generation. We have some statistics here seemingly showing that a more powerful, more expensive console could be the actual console that is the potato holding back this generation. Now, I say that somewhat sarcastically because at the end of the day, it is about optimization. There's absolutely no reason why some of these games should be running better on the Xbox Series S versus the PlayStation 5. But here is what El Analisa de Bits has shown with his comparison of the game. So far, the game is getting good review scores. A lot of people are praising A Plague Tale Requiem as a great sequel to the first one, sitting at an 83 on Metacritic right now, and just lots of high scores up there. You can even see some perfect scores, for example, from Twinfinite with a 5 out of 5. But now we have the early tech analysis, and here is how it's running. PS5 1440p 30 frames per second, Xbox Series X 1440p 30 frames per second, Xbox Series S 1080p 30 frames per second, and all these systems can run the game at 40 frames per second if you have it in the 120 hertz mode. Now, the first thing to point out here, when you're looking at this as a 30 frames per second game, obviously it is a different style of game than Gotham Knights. It is a slower game. It is a more linear game. But to be fair, Gotham Knights is running that bigger open world style of game that is faster paced at 30 frames per second, but with 4K and with ray tracing. So that is something to keep in mind when you're looking at the difference between these 30 FPS games. Now, like I said, we talked about the developer, technical artist who came out and called the Xbox Series S a potato. I said that's absolute nonsense. A lot of people said that is absolute nonsense. We've seen multiple real world of evidence and examples of the Xbox Series S performing adequately, being optimized with games, getting games at 120 FPS, 60 FPS. So the argument now, I think, is long gone. It really is up to how the developers are optimizing their games. And if they optimize them properly for the Xbox Series S, you can have great results out of a $299 console. Now, with the Plague Tale Requiem, it seems like a more expensive, more powerful console is actually the console holding back the generation in particular for this game, as the PS5 has performance issues in areas, and the Xbox Series S is actually running at a higher frame rate in some of these areas than the PlayStation 5. The Series X is the most stable version. It says here the PS5 has performance issues in some areas. The Series S has some clipping in shadows, textures, vegetation, draw distances, and reflections. The PS5 and the Xbox Series X use very similar graphic settings, and the PC has more vegetation, better ambient occlusion, shadows, and anisotropic filtering. And loading times across all the platforms are the same. That's something we always talked about and debated at the beginning of this generation as to whether there was going to be a big gap in the load times, with the PS5 touting their SSD as being just way faster than anything else out there, and we haven't seen that whatsoever so far. There are games on the Series X that load faster, and on the Series S, there's also very close in terms of the seconds if the PS5 is loading slightly faster. There isn't a massive gap between these two consoles. But you can see some screenshots here. The Xbox Series S is running it in 1080p at 30 frames per second, while the other consoles are running it at 1440p 30 frames per second. So there is that discrepancy. The load times across all of the consoles are pretty much the exact same. In fact, the Xbox Series X has a very, very slight advantage, and even the Series S has a very, very slight advantage over the PS5 in load times. But here is where things get interesting. Here are the frame rates. The Series S, 39 frames per second, the Series X, 40 frames per second, and the PS5, 31 frames per second. And you can argue all you want and say things like, well, this is because the Series S is in a 1080p mode, which would go further to proving the point that the Series S is no way holding back this generation. It is up to the developers to actually optimize games so that you can get those higher frame rates, even if that means lowering the resolution and reducing some of the textures within these games. It can be done, and it is something that all games should be doing going forward. But you look here, and the PS5 is the lowest in the frame rate category across these three consoles. And again here, Series S, 39 frames per second, Series X, 40 frames per second, and the PS5, 26 frames per second. So there are significant drops with the frames on the PlayStation 5. And by that logic, I guess it's the PS5 that is the potato that is holding the console back. Because you think about that, and then you think about comparing that to the Xbox Series X, which is a more powerful console. If the Series X is that much more powerful that it's not having those crazy frame drops with some of these games that have very, very good graphics, then it is the lower denominator console in the PS5 at the same resolution that is going to be hindering development when games are coming out in the future. Again, I say all this because it is such an absurd argument. Developers, if they want to, they can do with the Xbox Series S what they want, which is getting steadier frame rates going forward, which they have proven here with a Plague Tale Requiem. But I think the energy kind of has to be the same when you're looking at a Plague Tale Requiem at 30 frames per second if you're really upset about Gotham Knights at 30 frames per second, because going forward, there are going to be more games that come out that are 30 frames per second. I don't think it's a good decision. I think developers should definitely make sure they have that performance toggle in there, try to optimize the game as much as they can, so you're at least getting the option, even if the frames aren't 100% steady at 60 FPS. There are some drops here and there. Give gamers that option. That's what gamers want with these next generation consoles, and it can be done. We've seen multiple examples of that, and I think going forward, that shouldn't be an issue for most of these games with all of the different PC specs that they have to optimize these games for. But that's it for me. What are your thoughts on this? Is the PS5 the true potato and not the Xbox Series S? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. If you're new here and you liked what you saw, consider hitting that subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your support, and I'll catch you in the next video.
Bye.